We are live.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our ISE Fireside webinar. We're thrilled to be having our panelists today and Clarity as our sponsor. So many thanks to Clarity. Our topic today is IT security, check, but what about your OT security? So we're going to have a great discussion with all of you. Couple of reminders before we get started. If you are in need of CPE credits, you will be able to earn one from today. At the end of this webinar, please make sure you fill out the survey that will appear, and it will provide a space for you to include your CPE number. Following the event, we will send over the certification information so you can deposit your own CPE into your account, but you'll have the record of that. Don't exit early, and don't forget to do so, because you will not be able to earn your CPE overall or see the survey. And we do want your feedback about today's program. We will also have a Q&A session during the course of the program. So as you think of a question, go ahead and make sure you put your question in the Q&A window, and we'll be able to answer those during the course, towards the end of the program. We have a great agenda plan for all of us. We're going to introduce our panelists, and then we're going to have some opening remarks from our sponsor, and then we'll have our discussion. We have 3 different topic areas to cover today, and then we will have our Q&A session, and then close out the session. Again, we appreciate all of you for joining us today. Let's go ahead and introduce our panelists for now. So first, I'd like to have Dawn introduce herself. Dawn, thanks again for joining us. We really appreciate it. And tell us where you're located right now.
I am in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, home of the Steelers.
Go Steelers.
I'm Dawn Capelli, VP of Global Security and Chief Information Security Officer at Rockwell Automation.
And thanks so much for being here. Curly, would you be so kind to introduce yourself and tell us where you're at today?
Absolutely, Marcy, thank you. Curly Henry, I am in Atlanta, home of the Falcons, Hawks, Braves, and the champion soccer team. United. There we go.
Go United.
I am Executive Director of Cybersecurity Strategy and Architecture at Southern Company.
Thanks, Curly. And Galina, tell us where you're at and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Marcy. Galina Antova. I'm based in Palo Alto, California, and I just moved here a few months ago, so I'm not sure who I'm supporting yet. I'm still working on that. COVID has kind of kept me busy indoors, but thank you so much for hosting us today. Great to see also Curly and Dawn. A little bit of background about myself and the company. So I've been in cybersecurity for over 15 years, 8 years of that in industrial cybersecurity. So really one of the early times when we really started looking at that big challenge of how to bring operational technology into the domain of IT security. So before co-founding Clarity, I started and ran industrial cybersecurity services at Siemens. And 5.5 years ago, I started Clarity with the clear mission of addressing that huge gap that we have in operational technology cybersecurity. We've been very fortunate to raise over $100 million in financing and have some amazing strategic investors, the likes of Rockwell Automation, Schneider Electric, and Siemens. Also, given the interest in this segment, we've got customers across 18 different verticals in 50 different countries. And because of the maturity and how that segment is maturing, we tend to work with a lot of the Fortune 500. So we work with the top 10 out of 20 manufacturing companies in the world, the 5 of the top 10 food and bev, 4 of the top 10 electric utilities in the world. And really from my conversations on a daily basis with CISOs and security teams, a couple of things are very clear. One is that there's absolutely an urgent need to close that 25 plus years gap of industrial security and bring the posture of OT networks to where IT networks are. And the second thing is that we really need a consolidator approach. So we just don't have the time to recreate kind of the development of the IT security industry. And we have to do that in a smart way with consolidated platforms. And this is where Clarity is spending all of our time servicing our customers. And yeah, happy to chat a little bit more about the concrete security controls during the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Galina. And again, thank you, Clarity, for being our sponsor today. We really appreciate it. All right, well, let's go ahead and hit our first topic. Our first topic today is the owner of enterprise security. And as we all know, digitalization has really driven IT and OT convergence, especially with these OT systems. They've grown in sophistication, they've adopted automation. And while it's good for efficiency, and the convergence has really, as we've seen, is exposed billions of OT equipment and systems in these security risks. As we are quite aware and probably might keep us up at night, these adversaries are entering sometimes the OT environments and through the IT side of the house and remaining undetected for months and years as they look for opportunities really to undermine our operations or even steal our IP. But without this kind of visibility into the OT networks, security teams will really be unaware of these threats from happening because they really are quite silent and quite sneaky overall. So a lot of people don't really understand how all this works. I know you guys are in that world. So I'd like to ask first Dawn a question. Tell us a little bit about what type of OT equipment and systems does your enterprise actually utilize, and how do the OT networks integrate into your IT networks, and what advantages have you gained actually with the IT-OT convergence, and what also might keep you up at night about it and maybe concern you a little bit? I know that's a lot there, but I'd love to get your insights because I know you're an expert in this area.
Yeah, to keep it short and concise, I won't answer all of those, but what I'd like to talk about is that connectivity. We have linked our ERP, our quality, and our control layer devices into a single pane of glass using our Factory Talk MES functionality. So as products move through our manufacturing process, that data is transferred real time to our ERP system. So that guarantees that our ERP inventory is always accurate. It also links our real-time quality results so that our products can't move to the next step in the assembly line until they have satisfied all of the prerequisites. So we have a complete history for all of our products' complete manufacturing journey. And that converging of IT and OT, the networks and the systems, has dramatically improved our customer service, internal and external quality, and our operational productivity. And of course, we do that only using secure protocols, using HTTPS and SSL. What keeps me up at night is the fact that, just as you said, Marcy, OT security is just behind IT security. Until NotPetya hit in 2017, I think most companies, of course, if you were in power or water or oil and gas, one of those critical infrastructures, they've been targeted for years by nation state attacks. But the rest of the industrial control systems really didn't perceive themselves as being a target. And so cybersecurity wasn't a big issue. It was more about productivity, but that all changed. And since 2017, we've all been trying to catch up to many decades that have been put into IT security.
So Curly, let's think about this a little bit further. How does your IT and OT teams know what is secure, and how do they locate the machinery and networks when they're not secure? And how much visibility do you get into these environments when there is OT? And are you finding any obstacles out there?
Yeah, thanks, Marcy. Obstacles, yes, quite a few, but obstacles are just opportunities. So how do we know it is secure? So one of the things from a utility perspective is that there's been compliance efforts that have driven things either from a nuclear perspective and or a transmission perspective to ensure base level security requirements were being met for bulk power, for Southern Company being a vertically integrated utility that does.
You're cutting out, Curly. We're having a little hard time with your audio.
Is this better?
Yes.
Okay.
I think it'd be your thing moving around.
Gotcha. I'll hold it. Thank you. Yeah, so Southern Company being vertically integrated, we make, move, and sell power. So we generate, transmit, transmission, and handle distribution, but we also handle gas. So those systems for us include everything from plants and substations to the big power lines that everyone sees, but also the elements on the gas side. So our ability to know what's there is dependent, right? Some of that's a manual effort, much like you see on the traditional ISE side. Some of it is compliance driven, where you have to know every single element that is in an environment. But then you have that gray area, things that get added, things that get changed, things that get modified, or things that get introduced. And those have traditionally been difficult to keep up with. What you can't do is leverage traditional IT systems to do passive inventory or scanning in these types of areas for the sensitivity of them, because it has the ability to potentially break and/or, in our perspective, cut off the gas or the power to our homes and our businesses. So we've taken, I'll call it a journey. We've taken a 7-8 year, close to 10-year effort of going from leveraging traditional IT systems to try to have visibility into these areas. And over the last few years, leveraging more of these new technologies that were born and bred for OT environments that understand traditional OT protocols, not just HTTPS and SSL, but protocols that live in the OT environment, like Modbus, things that run in SCADA's environments. I would say we've got pretty good visibility because of the track record and the time that we've taken to try to be very intentional about getting these types of technologies into those areas. But it's been a struggle and it's been a challenge because largely we don't own that. The responsibility for those groups is to make sure that they can make, move, and sell power and that there's reliability and resiliency. And when you want to bring these types of solutions into those environments, they produce risk for those people that are the grid operators. So there's a level of relationship building that has to occur to be able to overcome some of those hurdles.
Thanks, Curly. Galina, who do you think should own security in a business? Because that's not a cut and dry answer in these worlds. And how do you think one should determine the roles and responsibilities for securing these OT systems from your perspective? I know you work with a lot of different clients, so I'd love sort of a best practice perspective on what you think there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll talk to what we're seeing in the industry, not so much maybe the way things should be, but the way things actually are, because there's a difference in some cases. I would say that over the last 2 to 3 years, we've seen a significant shift in terms of the ownership of those projects. So maybe 4 or 5 years ago, the conversation really was, okay, we know that we have a challenge, but we don't really know who owns that in the organization, and we don't have the budgets to do anything. In the last 2 to 3 years, as I mentioned, the clear ownership for cybersecurity of OT networks is landing squarely with the security organization. So in the vast majority of cases with the Chief Information Security Officer and their team. And what that means is that now they have to think about what are the core security controls that they want to extend to operational technology networks. But as Curly pointed out, it's not a copy paste from the IT domain. So you can't just take your existing vendors from the IT cybersecurity world and apply those to OT, because it just breaks the whole model of uptime and availability. So the most common scenario we see is OT specific technology implemented in the operational technology networks, where the risk-based aspects and the alerts and all of that cybersecurity related activity goes into the security operations center, and it becomes part of the existing governance process. So again, the technology is different, the approach might be different, but the outcome, which is risk reduction, across those core security controls is the same. Now, of course, that has the added benefit of things such as asset management and visibility and management of change specific to the operational technology teams. But from a ownership perspective, the budgets, the responsibility, and the accountability, I would say 99% of the cases of the Fortune 1000 companies that we work with is clearly with the security organization.
Okay. Let's go ahead and shift gears now to our next topic. And this is really about opening the door to IT/OT collaboration. A lot of these have been in silos for quite a long time, but we all know as security professionals and executives, to protect an IT/OT environment from here on out, IT and OT have to work together, think alike, and collaborate basically on the security measures and align with some common goals. A starting point might be to establish what other side needs, and for instance, perhaps gaining real-time visibility into the OT systems, maybe harnessing the OT network traffic for the security information that will keep them monitoring for these types of threats. And also OT being really involved in the operations aspects and running and maintaining manufacturing and safety standards. So with that said, I'd like to actually ask Curly a question. You are such a great, gregarious, outgoing type of person. So how would you say we should conduct effective collaboration between IT and OT? And what kinds of security goals would your IT team need to accomplish in order to protect the OT environment? So I'd love to get your perspective on how you really built that collaboration.
Yeah. I don't know that everyone would agree with your comment about my gregariousness, but I do try.
You're a lot of fun to be around.
One of the things that we have been able to leverage and has helped make it more effective is regular engagement and shared education. I've long preached a mantra about meeting people where they are, right? So our ability to kind of step into their world and step into their shoes and look at things from their perspective, as opposed to just coming in talking risk, the sky is falling, things are bad, and threats. It changes the tone of the conversation. It allows them to see that we're there to be a help, not a hindrance. It allows them to see that if we can partner together, we can collectively reduce the risk. Galina mentioned, actually, I think Dawn mentioned earlier about NotPetya. From a utility perspective, 2015 and 2016, the attacks that occurred in Ukraine, where the power was actually turned out, it gave new insight to those who have a responsibility to run the grid to understand what those risks are. And it allowed us to have more collaborative conversations based on real life events as opposed to theory, right? From there, we've just really moved into a lot of shared education. If you think about things like tabletop exercises and training, we've typically done those things in silos. But over the last few years, we've been very insistent upon, if we're doing any type of education or going to conferences, that we bring our business partners along with us, those people who have a responsibility to run the grid, so they get an opportunity to see what's happening on the other side, get it from another vantage point, not just the in-house people, but then allows us to collaborate and work together to come up with solutions.
So Dawn, what about you? What operational and production goals does your OT team actually need to ensure their security is in alignment, that they're working together? And how are they even working in tandem? Is there some friction there? I'm not trying to bring up huge controversy, but these are very different kinds of teams, but with a common goal, and how we all get there appears to be a little bit different in the mindset and the skill set.
Yeah, and in our company, this is my favorite topic, by the way. So I'm glad you asked me that question. It's really important that IT and OT work together as one team. And so what we did in the very beginning, when I became CISO and I suddenly had responsibility for manufacturing security, it was terrifying because I didn't know where to start. And so we started with the NIST cybersecurity framework. And so that was taking what we use in IT and applying it to OT. And I think that's really what we need to do here is we need to figure out what do we do in IT security that we can apply to OT, but you have to have a cross-functional team do it. So we all had a workshop, IT, OT, plant engineers, plant managers, security. We sat there together for like 3 or 4 days, and we went through every item in the NIST cybersecurity framework. And what that did was you had these two teams that really hadn't worked together. And now they started to understand each other. So when you talk about something like patching, IT would say, well, we can't patch your plants, you won't let us. And then the OT side would explain why and explain what would happen if you just start applying patches at the same time as you do in IT. And the same with the firewalls and the same with monitoring the network traffic. And so by the time we came out of that workshop, that was January of 17, we had a strategic plan that we had all built together. And so nobody owns it. Well, no, I should say everyone owns it. IT, OT, my team is responsible for overseeing it and making sure that we're going according to that roadmap. But we have a leader in my team in security, a leader in IT, and a leader in our manufacturing organization that are all responsible for execution, and they work together on a daily basis.
Thank you, Dawn. Galina, I'm going to ask you a question. You know, we all know we talked about where we are located right now, and we're certainly all working remotely. How do you think the shift to a remote work culture has affected current security measures that are being applied to OT systems?
Thank you. That's a great question. And I think that one of the biggest kind of silver lining of the current crisis is that it showed organizations that they actually could be much more resilient, and they could build that resiliency on the fly. So with many of the customers that we work with, there were those that actually accelerated their production because they were producing essential goods. And in that case, they had the need in many cases to have employees that are logging into the operational technology networks in a from a remote perspective. That just kind of consolidated the need for something that, for a platform that really gives you a whole visibility, not just within the network, but also what are the points, where are the entry points into that network. And obviously remote access is a huge it could be a huge attack vector, but if done right, it could actually give you a lot of resiliency and a lot of flexibility. So I would say probably in the first few weeks, many people were just uncomfortable because they had to very quickly transition to this remote mentality and remote work. But actually, once they started practicing that, of course, with the right security technologies in place, it just became apparent that this is a model that they could also leverage in the future. And with my conversations with so many security professionals, this is kind of what we joke about, is that also the crisis showed, not just to security professionals, but mainly to the peers around, that digitalization projects that in the past would have been considered, not secure enough to implement, etc. Now we're actually seeing organizations very aggressively moving towards those forms so that they have resiliency built into their operations, and they can operate a lot of their manufacturing processes to a large extent in a very remote fashion. So that's kind of the silver lining of the crisis, and I don't expect that this will go away. It will actually be something that I think we incorporate into the solutions and the approaches going forward.
Thanks, Galina. I think this is a great transition to our next topic, which is really about becoming a mature cyber organization, including OT. I think a lot of us had to grow up pretty quickly over the last few weeks in a figurative sense and really evaluate the different aspects around security as working remotely. But once the security ownership has really been established and the ITO teams are on the same page about security, CISOs and other security leaders in the C-suite really have to think about a long-term strategy that protects OT without hindering them, because that is the core to these businesses, right? At the end of the day. So if a plant machinery or electric grid gets hacked by a cyber criminal, God forbid, or a nation state, it really could lead to significant problems for public safety and even our national security. So no matter how robust the IT security is, the organization cannot necessarily be considered mature unless the OT is also included. So I'd like to ask you a question, Galina. What do you think are the limitations of physical segmentation of OT, and how do you think one can overcome them? And maybe thinking about even virtual segmentation to help your security team locate and isolate those threats, or enter and leave the OT network. And I'd love to get your perspective from what you're seeing from your clients out there.
Thank you. So I think this is a good example for a broader challenge that we're seeing, and that is, as Don also mentioned in the beginning, we're catching up literally with decades of a gap between the security posture of IT networks and operational technology networks. And so we just don't have 20 years to catch up. Really the ultimate goal is how can we reduce risk by the maximum amount in the minimal time. And so when customers are kind of thinking through, if they were just to take the traditional IT playbook and apply that to operational technology, they typically end up with something that is overly complex and does not actually serve the needs of operational technology networks. So I'll give you an example. Obviously, physical segmentation between the IT and the OT networks is something that should be there in place, no question about that, and it takes time to implement it. But when it comes to actual segmentation within the operational technology networks, let's say, again, depending on the vertical, if you're in nuclear power plants, you absolutely must have it. But if you're in something like manufacturing, then as you're planning for your physical segmentation between, let's say, levels 2 and 1, which is typically a project that takes 3 to 5 years if you have dozens of different facilities around the world. As you're planning for that, you can get immediate value with implementing virtual segmentation. And the difference really comes from the fact that in a lot of those operational technology networks, especially in the lower levels of the networks, you can't really do any automatic blocking of the traffic, because that will just kind of break the process that you're trying to protect. So the name of the game really is recognizing early on that you have a threat that you have to mitigate and really containing that. And so virtual segmentation is an example of something that literally could be implemented within hours. And it gives you pretty much all the immediate containment and alerts that you would need, and will also significantly shorten the process for the physical segmentation across all of your different networks and across the different sites. So when we talk about OT specific measures, this is how we have to think about what is the measure that I can implement literally in the next couple of weeks that will help me significantly reduce risk, and not just blindly take the best practices and playbooks from the IT. So we really are thinking from scratch on how to reduce the complexity as we're playing this catch-up game between IT and OT.
Thanks so much, Galina. Don, you've really helped mature your organization and done so many great things as it relates to the OT and the IT leadership and the security programs that you've put in place. What kind of insights can you share for other security leaders, how they might be able to communicate the OT security risk to the C-suite and the board? And what kind of language and metrics are you kind of putting in place to help articulate that? And from the difference of an IT type of security risk versus an OT type of security risk, because that kind of communication is very different. I mean, you're going to talk more about, I would imagine, productivity and impact and downtime versus the threats overall. But I'd love to hear what you might be saying to your C-suite and your board of directors and leadership.
So from a security perspective, first of all, I always like to make sure that they understand the current threat environment. So that's been changing. You know, in 2017, it was NotPetya. It changed in 2018 with malware targeted at ICS devices. And so it's always changing. In 2019 and now in 2020, it's ransomware hitting OT. That didn't used to happen. And now we're seeing ransomware hitting our supply chain. I got a call this morning about another one of our partners that was hit. And so it's good to let them know what's happening out there. But as far as metrics, we use the NIST cybersecurity framework for IT security, and they get it, they understand it. I've taken the time to keep using it consistently, and now they understand it. And it works for OT. And I like it because it really enables you to take a risk-based approach. Every company is different. The risk tolerance for every company is different. And so using the NIST CSF, we can explain, here's our risk, here are the threats, and here is our plan for addressing them. And they understand that OT security is much less mature than IT security, and so they're not expecting them to be equivalent in those scores. And that seems to work.
Excellent. So Curly, what do you think the IT security solutions that can be integrated quickly into, let's say, a blank OT canvas, and how would you determine those OT assets, and how would you locate them or monitor them and control? What kind of best practices can you share with our viewers today from your experience?
Yeah, I would I'd go down a couple of paths here. If it was a blank canvas, I think first and foremost, visibility is key. So the ability to ensure that you can see what's happening in those environments and pulling that information back out to people and systems that are monitoring and doing some detections around that would be important. I think the key item is segmentation. And Galina spoke about segmentation earlier. If you're able to segment appropriately, it allows you to essentially prioritize. If you have a blank canvas, depending on the size of your entity, the footprint of what you have to try to address could be quite large. By segmenting first, it would allow you to prioritize assets and solutions and technologies based on criticality. Another area around this is going to be asset inventory. Asset inventory, which essentially is going to lead to contextual awareness. Depending on an organization's approach, you're either going to have the same people who are monitoring traditional IT systems, who have done that for years and they understand what those systems look like. They understand DHCP and DNS and Windows boxes and Linux boxes, but do they understand RTUs and HMI and PLCs and the things that come off of those? The ability to leverage more native ICS sensors to provide contextually aware data. So those folks who may be less familiar with those systems and what it is that they do would give them a leg up. The ability to train people on an area that they traditionally have not grown up in is a challenge, but it can be overcome if those appropriate systems, especially those that are ICS aware, are brought to bear. That's going to help with the asset inventory. That's going to help with the visibility, and that's going to help with the contextual awareness.
Thanks, Curly. And I just actually want to say thank you to all of our panelists. What some great insights today. We have actually quite a few questions from our audience today, so I'd like to go ahead and proceed there. Let's see, our first question, who in the organization is championing these suggested enhancements in OT security, and what might be the conflicts that are blocking this transformation? So who would like to go on that topic? Don, did you want to go ahead?
Sure, I'll take that one. Well, funding models are different in every company, so that also influences what you can do. But in our
fair enough, money talks.
Right. So in our company, it's very important to get our senior vice president for all of our plants on board because he's the one who holds the purse strings. And fortunately, we've been able to do that. We even had a change in leadership last year, and the incoming SVP, he gets it. And so we didn't see any impact to our program. But he's our key stakeholder, but I think he is on board because the rest of our leadership team is on board as well. So you need to get that one champion, whoever it has the investment, holds the investment for your program. But in addition, if our leadership team at Rockwell didn't get it and wasn't supportive, then I think I would have a harder time. And the same with our board. So I think it's very important that you get that buy-in all the way up to your board and convince them of how important it is.
Thanks, Don. Did anyone want to add to that?
I would echo.
Okay, I'm going to go on. Oh, okay. Go ahead, Curly.
I was going to say, I would echo executive sponsorship that Don was just talking about is so critically key. When you have that support from the top and people fully understand what these risks are, it makes it easier to have these conversations to move the ball forward. From a champion perspective, I would venture to say that it's largely going to be the security teams who are going to be driving those efforts, but those conflicts are less once you have that buy-in.
Thanks, Curly. Our next question is really about, it says, with respect to physical segmentation, what are your thoughts on practices to gain ongoing visibility while keeping existing air gaps and other physical separations in place? Galena, maybe do you want to comment on that from your perspective?
Sure, happy to. And maybe it's a controversial view, but I really don't believe, because I haven't seen them in practice, that air gaps exist. So even for environments that strive to have that fully air gap, like nuclear power plants, there's always an attack vector in. And so I think that the mentality that helps us is one of assume that there is no air gap and think through what are the security controls you have to put in place to protect that. So couple of thoughts on the visibility. Obviously, physical segmentation, especially between the IT and the OT networks, is not negotiable. That always must be in place and must be maintained. But again, that doesn't provide perfect air gap. There are various different ways in which, for many attack vectors, getting directly into the OT networks. So kind of the two major components that you must have is you must have visibility within the operational technology networks to ensure that if there is an attack vector that is not coming from your IT, for example, if it's a direct connectivity, remote access from the outside, or this is even some physical presence that someone physically goes, for example, for maintenance activities on site, that you have visibility into the changes that are taking place. And secondly, this is all the ingress and egress points into your network and outside of your network. So you have to be monitoring connectivity to the actual network. But again, when it comes to air gaps, I think it's just better to assume that even if you're striving for those in reality never exist. 100%, they're never perfect. And so prepare yourself for having the visibility to be able to detect as soon as possible as there's any kind of lateral movement inside of the network.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. Let's see. We have quite a few questions here. This is great. Are there any examples of critical infrastructure supported by public cloud services or the OT environment forbidden from connecting to the services, and in an imperative to consume services outside of the traditional OT sector? That might be a question for Galena. I'm not sure, but
I'll take a quick stab and you guys can jump in. But I think so again, in the context of coronavirus crisis, attitudes are changing fast. So it depends very much on the vertical that we're talking about. Manufacturing, we've seen quite a lot of our manufacturing customers starting to be more open, at least for components of the infrastructure being hosted in the cloud environment. Now, given the fact that we are protecting networks that are very sensitive, that means that I think that we're still fairly far away from a model where everything is done from the cloud. So there is so it's a journey. And so while we started 5 years ago with everything was on-prem, we now have quite a few examples of mixed infrastructure. So yes, you do some of the monitoring on site, but some of the other activities are done from a central location. And I would say that a lot of the reluctance of the industry has traditionally been due to the fact that this is just how we've done things traditionally. And again, I think the coronavirus crisis showed them that we can do things in a different way, and we can move towards that cloud infrastructure a little bit faster. So OT networks will always be behind what kind of the IT security solutions that are cloud native and leading with cloud will be. But I think that we're well on our journey of doing that. And again, the crisis really accelerated that move and helped us build resilience.
Thanks, Galina. I'm going to go on to our next question. Is the Southern Company using any continuous threat detection systems for industrial control systems, perhaps like Clarity? I guess this will be for Curly, since you are at the Southern Company.
I am the Southern Company, or at least the representative in this panel. I talked early on about our journey. 7, 8, 10 years ago, we deployed traditional IT systems in these OT environments, traditional IT firewalls, traditional IDS devices, so on and so forth. And what I would call our next generation, our version 2, we have been able to start leveraging ICS native systems in those environments. We've had the opportunity to pilot and try a number of these, and we found them to be very effective. So I can see our growth of these types of solutions growing. As I mentioned before, the people building these types of systems are the ones who are focusing on this area. They're not trying to do a one-size-fits-all. They're really trying to ensure that the solutions that they're bringing to market are able to secure these ICS or OT environments. So yes.
Thank you, Curly. We have one other question here. Do you have an industrial cybersecurity team that sees both areas? And what would be the functions of this team so not to conflict with IT OT? So Don, do you want to jump on that, or from your perspective of how your team might be set up?
Yes. So we have a team in our manufacturing, our OT organization. It's called Operational Risk Management. So that operational risk management team they are responsible for implementing OT security in our plants, but there's an IT business partner who is a director. So this is a high-level IT leader, and that person is responsible for working with that ORM team on that implementation. And then my team, the security team, we are separate from both of them, and we have the responsibility for strategy, risk management, and governance. So it's really a triangle. And so we have IT, OT, and security all working together, but we're not all in one team. And it works really well that way. I'm not going to say it wouldn't work if you had a team like in OT or in IT that is responsible for OT security, but I can say that having that cross-functional team where you're bringing the SMEs from every part of the company together works very well.
Thank you very much, Don. And I want to say thank you so much to all of you, our panelists, for joining us today and sharing your knowledge. I think we had a great discussion. We had still a number of questions that we were not necessarily able to answer. So we've put on the screen Clarity's contact information specifically. If you want to get in touch with Galina, you'd be able to do so and continue the conversation that way. I'm going to ask everyone to fill out the survey. We want your feedback. It really does help us plan future programming out there. And I say that in my live events, but looking forward to saying that now in our digital world for a little while, for the time being. No, don't forget about your CPE credits. Put your number in there if you'd like to have your certification sent to you so you can show that you've earned 1 CPE for joining us today. Thank you, Clarity, for being our sponsor. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I think we had a great afternoon, and thank you for sharing your knowledge. We look forward to seeing you at our next ISE Fireside webinar. Have a good one, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.